Welcome back to another episode of Sacred Wild Man. My name is Roy, and today I'm going to cover the topic of emotions and how men can do a better job of connecting with their emotions. Now in this video, I'm going to cover three things. First is where men typically run into issues with their emotions. And then I will cover why emotions are important and deserve your attention. And finally, I'll cover 4 ways that you can better connect with and process your emotions. Let's jump in. One thing men tend to do is they try to intellectualize and rationalize their emotions. They try to think their way out of feeling. Now, when it comes to certain professions or things that are more structured, such as engineering or construction, that's a helpful approach because it's very direct, linear, and there's a direct way you can fix it. But when it comes to emotions, which are non-rational, that approach of intellectualization usually does not go well because the emotion is meant to be felt and expressed, not thought its way out of. And when men try to do that, they run into 2 issues. One is that they actually perpetuate that feeling and aggravate it even more. And 2 is that they end up projecting that emotion onto other people in their lives that most likely have nothing to do with the original source emotion. Now, an example of this, let's say there's a man who is working a 9-to-5 job. And it's a job he doesn't actually like. Most days he comes home and he's very stressed from the workday. And there's a growing sense of hating his job. Now let's say he's coming home from work one day and he's driving in traffic, he's still mumbling about how much he doesn't like this job. And then let's say a car cuts him off and that just sets him off. That just compounds the frustration he's been feeling from the workday. And perhaps in his mind or even out loud in the car, he shouts at the other driver who can't hear him. And now he's carrying that energy of anger and frustration and righteous rage. And so he comes home, he pulls into the driveway, turns the ignition off, and gets out of the car and slams the door shut because he's just fed up with the day. And then he walks to the front door, opens the door, and he comes across the following scene in his house. His kids, loud, rowdy, per usual, no more louder than they typically are. And then his wife approaches him and says, "You know, honey, I was thinking we could eat out tonight. You know, I didn't really feel in the mood to try to fix something for us this evening. So where do you think we should go eat?" And these 2 things just set him off even more. They are the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so let's say he yells at his kids like, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Shut up." And then towards his wife, he might say, "Oh my gosh, why didn't you figure this out? Why are you putting this on me? You should have figured out a plan for us. And now I have to do everything." And then perhaps from there, he gets into a huge argument with his wife or with his kids. And none of it has anything to do with them. This is the cost of avoiding and not expressing and processing one's emotions. Now, why are emotions important? Well, emotions are how we experience life, because life is meant to be felt, and emotions provide us that compass. They can tell us when something feels pleasant, and they can tell us when something feels unpleasant. So for a man who is disconnected from his body and disconnected from emotions, he will likely end up going off course or staying stagnant. The more connected a man is to his emotions, the more he is able to deeply connect with himself and to others and to the world. So take, for example, that man who came home from a stressful workday, was cut off in traffic, and came across the scene in the house with his kids being very loud and his wife saying, "Hey, where would you like to go eat tonight?" If he were able to process emotion from the workday and from being cut off, then he would effectively prevent himself from offloading that onto the people in his life whom he loves and have nothing to do with that original source of emotion. So in this case, the emotions can be a compass for the job that he hates. So instead of staying with that job and continuing to grumble about it, he can do two things. One is to consider, I really don't like this job. Now, am I going to stay in this job, or should I figure out something different, as scary or risky as that might be? And if he chooses to stay with that job, then he will have to do some more earnest reflection on, what is my responsibility now? I have deliberately chosen to stay with this job that I really don't like. It pays the bills, and for now, it might be a necessity. It's just something that I have to bear with. So how can I begin to deal with my frustration at this job in a more constructive way, instead of every day coming home angry, grumbling, and then offloading that onto my family? So what happens here is that because he is connected to his emotions and he is processing them, he can now have a more clear way forward. So here are 4 methods that you can try to begin to connect with your emotions more. And the big theme of all of these is connecting more with the body, because the body is actually where you feel the emotions first. You don't think the feeling into existence. You feel it first, and then your brain processes it afterwards. It's like touching a hot stove. You don't think, oh, that's hot. You feel it and register it in your body before your mind ever thinks that thought. So the first tip is to separate the thought or the story and the sensation and emotion. So in the case of the man who comes home from a stressful workday and was cut off, he can keep spinning this story of, my boss is an idiot, this guy who cut me off is an idiot, everybody in the world is an idiot and is frustrating me. That's the thought, that's the story and narrative he's telling himself. So in separating the two, what it looks like is saying, all right, I'm aware of this thought and story that I have, that it's everybody else's fault or there's some stupid people in this world. I'm gonna set that over here, and I'm just gonna focus on the feeling and the sensation. Now, when he does that, he will likely notice something in his body. So maybe it's like, oh, my jaw is really tight. I'm clenching my teeth. Oh, my facial muscles are really tight. There's a furrowed, eyebrows going on here, and there's just a lot of tension here. Or, oh man, like my shoulders are tight. I'm pulling them up, and my breathing is shallow. Gosh, my fists are clenched. It's like I'm preparing myself for a fight. And when he does that, he removes the narrative and he can begin to process the feeling and the sensation. Tip number 2 is to set a reminder each day to pause and check in with yourself. So let's say you start with 3 reminders: morning, in the middle of the day, and in the evening. And the reminder says to take maybe just 30 seconds or a minute to stop everything that you're doing and notice what you feel in your body. The whole idea of this is to build that muscle of awareness, because without that intention or conscious choice to say, I want to connect with my emotions more, I want to connect with my body more, it's never going to happen. It's just going to be wishful thinking. It's going to be an idea that never gets put into action. So this is a way to enforce that and begin to exercise that muscle. Step number 3, or tip number 3, is bioenergetics or core energetics. Although they're slightly different, they both kind of derive from the same 2 men who worked on this. So there's a man named Wilhelm Reich and then his disciple Alexander Lowen. And kind of what they worked with, this idea of bioenergetics or core energetics, is a way to use movement, exercise, and sound to begin to express and alleviate chronic muscle patterns, chronic holding patterns. Because what Wilhelm Reich talked about is this idea of character armor. And what that means is that character armor is a way we try to shield ourselves from the world, whether that was traumatic life events growing up, or just living in an unpleasant household. There is a way in which we started to hold our own energy field and our muscles and tissues in a way to guard ourselves. Because again, emotions are felt in the body. And so to not feel emotions, you have to arrest your breathing and you have to tighten and constrict your muscles to not feel, to hold that all in. Now, bioenergetics and core energetics allows you to begin to chip away at that armor and to begin loosening and relaxing. Because once you can do that, your life force begins to flow, your energy begins to flow again, and you can actually experience and live life rather than just trying to navigate it as if life is something to be avoided. Now, I'll put a link to a bioenergetic exercise that you can do. So there's this man named Elliot Hulse who's also really into studying Alexander Lowen and Wilhelm Reich. And he has something here that he learned from, I believe, a man named Osho, who has this active meditation. And it's a very active meditation. There's nothing quiet about it, but it is very helpful for beginning to express and alleviate the chronic muscle patterns and holding patterns in your body. So I'll put that link in the description. Try it out and see what that does for you. I will also put a link to something called a character analysis test. This again relates back to Wilhelm Reich, and similar to those personality tests like the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs, this test kind of asks you some questions to then provide you an analysis of your character pattern, your character armor, and you can get a better sense of, why you hold your body that way. And finally, the last tip is the Wim Hof Method. Some of you may know who Wim Hof is, but for those who don't, he is a Dutch man who is also known as the Iceman for all the records he has set for cold exposure. And the Wim Hof Method is basically combining some ancient yogic pranayama breathing techniques with cold exposure. And again, this practice, just like bioenergetics and separating the thought from the emotion, is bringing your awareness back to the body, where you feel and register emotion. So with this breathing technique, you are doing some active breaths and also some passive breaths. And the idea is you're circulating your breath, your chi or prana, this life force that invigorates your body. And when you do that, you begin to move the stagnant energy in your body. And it's not uncommon for people to begin to have some emotional releases. Some people express spontaneously laughing or crying or just shaking and trembling. So I'll put a link to that as well. That's something you can try. And leave a comment below letting me know how these methods go for you. Try one or try all of them and let me know how it helps you better process and connect with your emotions. And if you would like for me to create a guided meditation to help you begin to connect with and process your emotions, leave a comment below as well. Peace.